Fire in the hole, people. Oh, wow. I put the smack down on it. Well, guys, welcome back. This is Eric here with Iraq Veteran 8888. Today, we're going to be talking about a very unique and special firearm, the Matchlock Musket. Join me today. We're going to have a look at this very interesting part of military history. I'm going to bring my buddy Kevin along for the ride. He's a big black powder enthusiast such as myself. We're going to talk a little bit about this gun, shoot it some more, show you the loading procedure. Generally, really fun gun to have out the range. Let's see if we can shoot some more stuff with it. All right, well, Kevin and I are going to briefly talk about Matchlock Musket here. Matchlock muskets have a really interesting history. One of the first firearms that was even conceived by anybody was basically nothing more than just a tube tied to a stick with black powder and a ball stuffed in the end, and then you just took a match or whatever or lit it and it just shot it towards the enemy. And I think that the effect that those early crude weapons had was more psychological than physical. I think that a lot of those weapons just scared people that weren't used to hearing them being fired. Right. But I think as people really got to know more about the effectiveness of them as a direct weapon, then they developed the Matchlock as a response to that, to make it a little bit more pointable and shootable and everything like that. Right, a little bit
more user-friendly. And yeah, they were definitely demoralizing. I mean, just imagine all you're used to hearing is just the sounds of screaming, so all of a sudden you hear bloom, bloom, you know, yeah, it's got to be a scary thing. Also, it pretty much rendered armor useless until the World Wars. Yeah. You know, we weren't able to wear protective armor until then because of firearms.
Absolutely. So. Pretty random. So one of the interesting things about the Matchlock and why I wanted to do a video on a Matchlock in general is because it was really one of the first firearms that came along with us to the New World when we first became a very early fledgling nation of miscreants and nobodies. Right. You know what I mean? Like, it was really early on, and this was one of the first firearms that would have saw use in the New World early on. We're talking mid-1600s or so. The English used these in a very long and bloody civil war, you know, back then. So a lot of really interesting things. The Matchlock, essentially, what I'm holding here is a piece of slow match. Basically, what would happen is you'd have a couple of musketeers on a line. Let's just say in the days of musketeers, when we think of Matchlocks, that's what we think of. You would generally have an officer, an NCO back behind the line, and he would have a big lantern or whatever, and he would make sure that all the soldiers were keeping their match lit if they went out and everything like that. Each musketeer would have about 6 or 7 pikemen on the line protecting him during his reloading sequence, because a good musketeer maybe 1-2 shots every 2 minutes. Mm-hmm. A typical musketeer only carried about 12 rounds of ammunition on him in these things called apostles. And the apostles were just bottles pre-charged with everything they needed hanging off of them. So each guy basically had like 12 hand grenades hanging off his body.
They called them the 12 apostles.
Right, exactly. So it's kind of scary to think that, you know, if you're on the line, you've got a burning piece of match cord in your hand.
At both ends.
Yeah, at both ends usually. They would light both ends. Black powder bombs basically hanging off your body. And I'm sure in the duress of combat, there was quite a few people that would likely have set off the charge at the wrong time, or had, you know, the gun go off in their face or something like that.
Or you're grabbing the bottle with the left, to get your match was in your left hand, so grabbing your bottle with your left hand and blowing yourself up. But that really, it kind of made drills very important to them, because everything was such a long, drawn out procedure that drilling was a big thing with them, so that they made sure that everything was in order.
Now, to put that into perspective, I mean, right now I'm holding a piece of burning match cord. Yes, there's black powder on the table. I'm very well aware of that. I've got my match cord well separated from my black powder. A soldier in combat back then might not have had that opportunity. Generally, the way that they would load the gun, and we're going to go over the loading procedure in a minute, so I won't bore you guys too much with that. But basically, there was a very complicated set of drill movements that dictated how they did it in order to facilitate the loading of the gun, not only safely, but in a quick manner. I mean, drill movements, muscle memory. Even back then, they understood that doing the same thing every time would yield the speed with practice. Now, one of the interesting things about the Matchlock is it turned any guy into a archer figure. If an archer back then required a lot of training, to be able to shoot well. A Matchlock guy, you could be armed with a Matchlock musket, could be trained in a few days,
right,
and be generally in good enough shape to be able to sling a ball out of this thing.
Right, to do what it was purposed for.
Absolutely.
Right.
And so to put it in perspective, this is a 72 caliber smooth bore Matchlock musket. It does not contain rifling anywhere in it. It's got a long barrel. It looks ungainly, but it's actually quite elegant and simple to point, believe it or not. Mm-hmm. This shape of stock is very common for what you would have experienced back then in various types. This is a later style of Matchlock musket that uses more of a sear style. Okay, this serpentine, these jaws hold the match, and the match is lowered into the pan. The pan contains a pan powder, which sets off the main charge and expels the ball out the barrel. Very crude, very simple. Earlier guns were what was known as a serpentine matchlock. The serpentine was one giant piece that had no spring attached to it, and when you squeeze that rod, it would just lower the serpentine down into the pan. This actually has a return spring and a sear arrangement. This is a much later style of matchlock. So they're always fun to play with. They
are, and it's been pretty cool. This is my first time shooting one.
Yeah, yeah.
They're not very common. They have a friend that has one. Unfortunately, I'm fortunate enough to have that.
Absolutely.
But yeah, it's beyond cool. I mean, it's definitely, it gives you an appreciation for war firearms now and the evolution of it.
Well, the main point that I always want to drive home with these videos, one is to teach a little bit about the history of the guns that we're using. Two, to promote musketry. I think that in a lot of circles and shooting circles, black powder is a dying art.
Yes.
And people, you know, this is an art form. Shooting these guns, it really caters more into the art form than it does. I mean, there are guys that hunt with these things, go out and try to kill deer with them and stuff, but generally this is more of a heritage type thing, like, you know, honoring military heritage, honoring early heritage of early Americans and everything like that. So we're going to shoot the gun some. This particular gun I bought from a guy at a place called Veteran Arms. His name is Charles over there. Really good guy. And one of the odd things that I'll just elaborate quickly on in this market per se, these guns are kind of hard to locate. It's not like you're really just going to find them laying around. This is actually a entry-level musket. This is not an expensive musket. This is like 650 bucks. They're not terribly expensive, but these can get up to 2-3 grand.
Oh, easy. Yeah.
You know, you get some well-known gun maker who's well-known for making these period correct guns. I mean, they charge arm and a leg for the guns.
Yeah, I mean, how many people are making them?
Not many.
This is, you know, who knows how to make it.
Yeah, so this is definitely what you'd consider an entry-level gun. It's not a fancy gun. I'm going to be loading the gun from this Possibles pouch right here. This is a really neat pouch that I picked up through Track of the Wolf, I believe is where I got this one. And it's from a place called The Leatherman, blackpowderbags.com. It's made out of elk leather. So it's got a ball starter spot for it right there. I've got my patches in here, my round balls, and I got a little spot to put my pan powder flask, which he has down here safely on the other side of the table. This contains 4F pan powder, and then we're going to be charging individually 2F powder charges, putting them down the barrel. So enough talking, let's load the gun, go over the loading procedure, have a little fun. So to load the gun, first we're going to start out by charging the pan with some pan powder. Now this is not period correct flask here. This is actually for a revolver, but you know what? That's okay. I'm drawing everything from my little Possibles bag I showed you guys earlier. Close the flash hole cover, shake or blow off the excess powder. Take your charge, which of course if we were doing this by the numbers, the charge would be dispensed from an Apostle contained on the shooter's bandolier. Pour it down the barrel. Lost a little bit of my powder, that's okay. Not a big deal. Okay, what you want to do is use some type of wadding material. Now, sometimes they would use like a paper cartridge. That's completely fine. If you're using a paper cartridge, dispense the powder into the muzzle, grab the paper or wadding or whatever you're going to use, and scour it home. I'm just going to start by starting the patches with my finger roughly. I'm using boar butter soaked shooting patches. Now, many of you guys are going to ask why we're not actually patching the ball. That's not really the prescribed method for loading one of these. If you patch the ball, it's going to be a real bear to get down the muzzle. Take your scouring stick. This is not a ramrod. This is a scouring stick. Scour your charge and your wadding home. Make sure it's nice and tight. Pull out your scouring stick. Grab your 72 caliber round ball, placing it sprue down. Of course, in the heat of combat, wouldn't really matter. You just grab it however you want, stuff it in there. But for my purposes, I put it down sprue facing down. Scouring stick, make sure the ball is seated against the charge and the patch material. Replace your scouring stick. You don't want to shoot your scouring stick out of the end of the gun, then you don't have a way to reload the gun, right? Check your pan to make sure your charge hasn't jumped around too much. Close the pan, blow or shake off the excess. Tend your match cord. This is called tending the match. Grab the match cord, give it a blow. Make sure you got a good ember, otherwise the gun's not going to go off. You'll place the match cord into the serpentine jaws with careful consideration to the angle of the match in relation to the flash pan. Test to make sure it's in the proper location, which it is. Give it one last blow. Open the pan and you're ready to fire. Pretty easy. We'll see if we can hit that gong. All right, we shot our gong, we connected. At this point, you'll open up the serpentine, remove the match, tend the match. You'll place the match in your left hand. Musketeer would always load his musket holding the match in his left hand the entire time. Now, for the purposes of the demonstration today, obviously we're going to make sure the match is well away from the charge and well away from the loading procedure, but typically they would have the match held in their left hand out of the way. Sometimes they would have a little hook on the end of their shooting stick that they could place the match on safely out of the way while they loaded the gun. Despite all of the drill procedures and the safety procedures and the drill movements, plenty of accidents still occurred with this gun. It's pretty crazy. We're going to let Kevin have a shot, see how he fares.
Woo! That thing sure does wallop. You know, the invention of this really changed warfare. Like I was saying earlier, this really just goes right through any kind of armor they would have had. It punches right through it. Arrows, crossbows, you know, all that stuff could have been reflected. This just didn't. Another thing about this versus modern projectiles do a real good job of slicing and cutting their way in. This really just punched a hole in. So when you're talking about an unsurvivable wound, especially with their medicine, I mean, you got whacked with this, you knew you got whacked with something. You know, and like I said, the effectiveness of these, they weren't really a primary role. It was everything at once. So you still had your foot soldiers, you still had your pikemen, you had all these things. This was definitely a supplemental thing, especially when it was made. But the English did a heck of a job with these things during their Civil War. But I guess I'll let Eric get another one of these shots off and see what we keep going here.
All right, we're going to take another shot here. I've got it set up. We've been kind of going in real time. One thing I want to mention about this, you noticed how when Kevin was tending the match, the other end of the match got lit just from an ember hitting the end of the match. So you can see where there'd be a lot of accidental discharges with these things. You've got to really be careful when you're shooting them. Let's take a shot, shall we? Tell you what, we're going to try 100 yards. Put it on out there, but I missed him about, looks like about a foot or two to the left. All right. You notice that this burning match cord is consuming itself pretty quick. Slow match is much more than just a piece of rope on fire. It's actually a treated rope that allows itself to have a controlled amount of burn for a specific amount of time. Now this match is one that I made out of nothing more than just some hemp rope, soaked in a little bit of melted black powder. I took some hot water and black powder, melted it down, soaked the rope, allowed it to sit and dry. It's an effective slow match. It does work, but it's probably not a historically correct slow match. You can see where having a burning match cord burning on both ends would pose a safety risk for a soldier, especially when you got these explosive bottles hanging from you all day. I mean, I imagine that a lot of accidents were pretty common. Also, a soldier running guard duty in those days would consume about a mile of slow match. Because think about it, you're walking around with this burning match cord, okay? You've got to be able to be ready to fire your musket at any time. If you're pulling guard duty, you can't just go and light up a match to get ready. You got to be able to fire at an assailant immediately. So sentries on guard duty, each one would go through a mile of slow match. Even if they didn't fire a single shot on guard duty the entire year, they still went through a mile of slow match. So the interesting thing to note is that flintlocks are what kind of this gave way to. So we went from matchlock to flintlock. You're going to see a video coming from us soon where we're going to go through the entire history of firearms technology from around the middle of the 16th century to the current day. Make sure you stay tuned for that. That's going to be a fun video. But for now, I'm going to let, I don't have much slow match left. We're going to let Kevin have another couple of shots here, have a little fun. But usually a soldier would light both ends of the match cord. That way, if the concussion or whatever made that one end go out, he could simply swap to the other end and he'd have a freshly lit end. Pretty cool.
Woo! One thing about shooting this for sure versus all the other black powders I've shot is this thing wallops you. I mean, the way this thing sits up here, it really whacks you in the cheekbone. It's like getting punched by Mike Tyson every time you shoot the gun. It's beyond fun. As you can see, it probably wasn't 3 minutes since Eric shot than me shooting, and the match is already this low. It's burning pretty quickly. So there's a lot of things that you have to consider when trying to shoot one of these things against the enemy. I mean, I couldn't imagine the logistics of it just as a soldier trying to do it. It'd be very difficult. I bet they were pretty happy to see the wheel locks come up. Although it did require a special tool to turn the wheel and all that, it would have been a lot better than having to deal with these matches. But anyway, I guess we'll let Eric shoot one more. We appreciate it.
All right, we're going to see if we can take out a watermelon here. We haven't been doing a terribly high volume amount of shooting in this video because, quite frankly, we've had quite a few problems. These things can be pretty temperamental to film. We're going to try our best though. We're not very far away. Hopefully I can connect with our melon here. Like Kevin said in the last statement he made there, these things have devastating wounds, pushing bone out of the back of the wound and everything. They're really, really crazy. We've done some ballistics gel testing with these things. You probably saw from earlier. I mean, they're pretty wicked guns. Devastating wounds. But let's have a shot on our evil watermelon here. Pretty decent ember. Hopefully she'll go off. Might work. All right, let's see if we can tag our watermelon. Well, I think we hit it. We hit it with so much force, we about knocked his buddy off his feet there. That was a pretty ridiculous amount of power. You really can't argue with that big old round ball slapping you. Big old heavy, pure lead round ball, 72 caliber. I have a smoothbore Matchlock Musket. It doesn't really get any better than that. I hope you found this video informative and fun. You know, it's kind of hard when you're talking about 2 minutes per shot, but it's definitely a ton of fun to work with a Matchlock. If you ever have an opportunity to fire one, I strongly suggest taking the opportunity to shoot one. Maybe not really for everybody. This is kind of one of those niche kind of things that maybe only a select few are going to really go through the motions to even worry about something like this in terms of shooting. But we hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you for watching. Special thanks to Kevin there at Moss Pond for coming out and having some fun with us today. Much more on the way, more black powder, more milsurps, all kinds of fun stuff, more gunsmithing, reloading. And if you haven't, make sure you sign up for our email list. Go to iraqveteran.com. You'll see a little box that asks you to sign up. We're going to start doing a newsletter about every 2 weeks with all kind of cool behind the scenes stuff, things that you won't want to miss. Trust me, sign up for it. That way you can also make sure you're staying on top of man-can announcements as well. Thanks for watching. Catch you next time.